in order to add and subtract rational expressions that have different denominators, we're going to have to be able to find the lowest common denominator between them. So one way that we're going to be able to look at this is when we have a coefficient along with a variable term. Another way is when we have binomial terms that are our denominators. So in looking where we have coefficients and variables, we need to find the lowest common denominator that is a multiple of both 20 and 36. So the best way to do that would be to find the lowest or the greatest common factor between these two numbers by using subsequent division. So we take 20 and 36, we try to divide by the highest number that we can, or the greatest common factor that we find. And for me, that number would be 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5, 36 divided by 4 is 9. So these numbers don't share a common factor, so the greatest common factor between 20 and 36 is 4. If we take that number 4 and multiply it by 5 times 9, we will get the lowest common denominator. So 4 times 5 is 20. 20 times 9 is 180. So I know that my lowest common denominator is 180. And now I'm looking for numbers that have factors of x's in it. Well, my lowest common denominator has to have 4 factors of x in it for this term, but it has to have 5 factors of x in it for this term. So 180 x to the 5th is the lowest common denominator between 20x to the 5th and 36x to the 4th. To review here, I looked at the two coefficients and divided them subsequently by the same number, and I tried to find the greatest common factor of these numbers when I did that. After I did that, what I was left with were two numbers that did not have any common factors, so I knew I was finished, and then I multiplied these three numbers together. And some people like to remember that to get the LCD, you multiply along the L with these three numbers. All right, so we would have 4 times 5 times 9, which came out to be 180. And then your lowest common denominator as a multiple of your factors is just going to be the highest exponent in your group. All right. So now when I look down here, if I wanted to find the lowest common denominator between a denominator of x plus 3 and x minus 5, I don't have to go through any of this up here. All I have to do is realize that the lowest common denominator would be that denominator that includes both of these two factors, x plus 3 times x minus 5. So that is my lowest common denominator. Down here, I would want to factor these two first. So I really have 4 over, and I'll factor a 3 out of here. So this is 3 times a plus 9. And then over here, I'll factor an a out of both of these. So this is really a times a plus 9. So if I wanted to find the lowest common denominator between these two, it needs to have all of these factors in it. So it needs to have, well, an a plus 9, we can see that, because there's an a plus 9 on this side and an a plus 9 on this side. It needs to have a 3 in it, and it needs to have an a in it. So 3a parentheses a plus 9 is the lowest common denominator between these two denominators. All right, so in each of these, there's a different way of looking at it. With the coefficients, we have to find the LCD of the coefficients first. We find that by finding the greatest common factor and then multiplying by the remaining factors. When it's a binomial times a binomial, we can just multiply the two of them together and just keep them expressed like that. We don't have to turn it into a trinomial. And if they are binomials that we can factor the greatest common factor out of, you should do that, and you then may have a combined group of factors from which you can cancel a common one if you need to.